Welcome, everyone, to the BlueDrop podcast, where we talk about Bluefly Collective's perspective on Drupal and our community.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode where we are discussing data sovereignty.
I'm Chad Hester, a co host with Rose Cameron, and I'm a technical consultant and solutions architect with a 25-year background in web strategy, design, user experience, and development. I've been working heavily with Drupal and this community for over 16 years.
And I'm Rose Cameron, global brand strategist and cultural anthropologist with over 30 years of experience working in high tech. I've launched little known languages such as C, C++, Visual Basic, Linux, Rational Rose, Java, and Azure. Friend and confidant to the developer community. Now, joining us on today's episode is my buddy, Johan Drolshagen. He's the Chief Technology Officer of Bluefly, bluefly.io, as well as Nexus 3. The best way to communicate with him and contact him is Johan with two N's, not one, but two N's, Drolshagen, Drolshagen, at bluefly.io.
Well, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, our pleasure. So I guess in general, what have you been up to lately? I guess that's a loaded question, though.
Man, we're all over here getting our own new PhDs. I mean, the rate of ingest of information and the new technology abilities is fantastic. It's broad. I'm actually really happy to describe that it's coming down from the heights and it's being reachable by those of us in the Drupal community, which don't necessarily work at the highest levels and the highest scale of things, but it's taking Drupal to that next level, and it's really it's some pretty impressive stuff.
It's wonderful to hear and exciting, certainly for Bluefly to have you on board guiding a lot of those efforts.
Mhm.
Well,
So
I'm keeping my head above water. I'd hesitate to say guide at this point, but yeah, it's pretty exciting.
you're modest. But we're here to talk about data sovereignty today, which you know quite a bit about. I guess just to kickstart our audience on what that actually might mean, can you give us a high level definition of what data sovereignty actually is?
Yeah, and I will make sure it stays high level because at every layer it can get more and more complicated. And in a very good and powerful way. So data sovereignty literally just means that you own what you've got, you own what it outputs, you own everything around it, you own everything that it takes to make it, to store it. You have got to, at least in that cloud concept, be able to contain and protect and control access and egress to all of the truly necessary information that is responsible for making whatever it is, your business, your industry, your client, your whatever, truly autonomous. And that autonomy is probably the best word that I could use to describe data sovereignty. And if you can do that at every level, with every piece, with every access point, that's when you can truly be considered sovereign within your data or of your data.
So sounds a bit like a controlled junkie's wet dream. Um, what do you think is so important about data sovereignty, especially in the current geopolitical context, Johan?
Well, let me that's a great question, but let me invert it a little bit, which let me demonstrate how not having data sovereignty can be a huge problem. There's something that's going on right now that I think is near and dear to my heart. For those that don't know, I also happen to be a member of the bar in Washington State, so I pay a lot of attention to legal matters and the way those things happen. Um, And it sounds, I say the way they happen because those processes are very linear, which very little of what we'll discuss in programming and data sovereignty is linear. But for example, we've got flock cameras are a big issue across the country and in other countries, because I know Chad, you're up in Canada, and flock issues have had some big issues there. So flock cameras have this architecture of content storage, which in their case is object storage and videos and that type of thing, plus the analysis of those videos. They're based out of Atlanta, but they claim ownership to the the videos and that type of thing that are produced for their clients, which are communities, municipalities, and counties and states. But then they claim ownership to that content. They take that content overseas and then they license it back to their client in the event that they want something, which is creating, at least in US speak, a lot of First Amendment violations. And where they store their data, um, they won't respond to subpoenas or warrants for that
Hmm.
information. So it creates a barrier of generating a lot of uh, privacy insensitive data, and then it puts it into a protected state where it cannot be regulated or in most cases even accessed without very costly, time consuming, and extreme efforts. Now, that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think that the way Flock uses it is a good way, but if you're in a corporation where you have large amount of very sophisticated data, let's say HIPAA compliant type data, you not only want control of that, but you want control of that in your jurisdiction or in your proximity, and you need certain levels of observability into not only those systems but that content. And that can be done, and it can be done in conjunction with uh, role-based access controls and and right, they're all, this is where all the layers start coming together that can really make this a very powerful thing. It can actually ensure privacy rather than bust privacy up. And then you simply have uh, jurisdictional quote unquote authorities. For example, I work with a lot of law enforcement and prosecutors and courts that will simply demand or have it as a base expectation when they take on a new platform or project, whether it's a software as a solution or a platform as a solution, where they may want to use a higher scale platform. However, they still want their storage insured, and part of the insurance of that is observability. And when you can take what I think is perfect for this, which is Drupal, that has that role based access control, the IAM, the identity access control, as well as we can separate it out with group and subgroup structures, as well as domain access. Then you have a very, very powerful platform that can accommodate all of your clients' needs for data sovereignty. And at some point, I'll just hint that it's out there, but you can actually distribute an executable boundary to the benefit of the clients
Hmm.
that allow them not only to have their own storage, but to have their own compute power. And then eventually, and by eventually I mean somewhere around next week after we announce it at DrupalCon, we can actually deploy agents into a client's own clusters and allow their agents to work within their own data to create their own output and with other agents as well. Again, all while maintaining data sovereignty.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that cool. It's that cool.
Yeah.
So I guess that's a good dovetail into the more specific question. What are you and Bluefly doing to help organizations pursue data sovereignty? I think you're touching on this already, but you want to dig into that a little bit deeper?
Sure, sure. And I will I'm going to try and put as much of this into sort of like Drupal ease as I can, because I know our watchers are mostly Drupalers. But to give you an idea, for example, there's an open API movement that requests and encourages and rewards those folks with APIs to have a standardized approach, right? And we even did an API normalization module that would allow you to take APIs that didn't fit into that category, but then sort of work on an adapter to bring them into the system, so that they could be standardized. And when we're talking about agents, we kind of need the same thing, right? And I'll say specifically to agents, but just AI as a general. And there's actually a push by NIST right now, which is out of the Department of Commerce, which is the National Institute of Standards and Training, or Standards and Technology. Sorry, I'm getting my law enforcement mixed up. Um, where they standardize the agents, and by doing so, it makes their functionality a little bit more transparent. And anytime data sovereignty is an issue and you put agents into your own clusters and handle that boundary issue, well, you want to know what those agents are doing.
Yeah.
So OSSA is something very specifically designed to create a standardization for the agents. We also have several other things where we can go in. We have a module where we can go in and actually read the agent, so that we can, using our own agent, read a contributed agent in order to know what it's going to do. And we've gone as far as to create the equivalent of a control plane that we call a contract plane, so that when we have a centralized Drupal instance with decentralized storage and compute, we can insert observability into the multitude of agents that are within that client's data sovereign structure, so that that's not drawing on any resources for the Drupal instance itself. And we can monitor them for compliance. We can flag anything that's outside of compliance, and we can change states within that cluster externally. So that additional observability, that additional monitoring, and that additional compliance all requires that standardization going in. And we've been able to do that. So imagine in my legal field work where we can create an evidence system where the centralized repository is what we call immutable. So it's sort of like giving anybody that needs access to it read only access, and it would have to be secured through tunnels. And then that cluster would handle all of its own compute and analysis and that type of thing. And this is where, for example, if we were storing body-worn camera footage, we could actually run an agent on the body-worn camera automatically. It's an agentic release that we could then make body-worn camera footage hide faces and remove names from audio and that type of thing, so that we could take body-worn camera from being submitted to having a publicly acceptable video available for evidence purposes in a matter of hours or a
Wow.
day. Right? It's a one-to-one time frame. So if it's an hour's worth of video, you can have that video processed in an hour in order to be able to have it released, whether it's public or whether it's to defense counsel or review from internal affairs or whatever the case may be, in a very short period of time. And again, I want to keep bringing this back to sort of land for the Drupalers, which is it would do it all in its own cluster, not in the cluster or multiple clusters that are supporting the application layer, which would be Drupal. So you have all of these fantastic abilities to get these other machines working and doing work that aren't interfering or potentially interfering with your core Drupal experience.
It's certainly impressive. Now, as you're talking through this, one of the things that strikes me is that probably the first step for an organization would be to evaluate their current technology for these areas of concern. You talked about access points, you talked about the legality issues, you talked about, where it's held, where it's going to. Um, what are your recommendations for how organizations can evaluate their current technology for areas of concern that they should focus on, and potentially how they go about instituting data sovereignty? Is it something I have to do holistically all at once? How do, I figure out what my issues are and then how I deploy it?
Great question. And I know I probably shouldn't do this in a podcast, but today is March 20th. The reason I mention that is yesterday, last night, March 19th, the California State Bar put out an advisory to every attorney in the state of California, telling them clearly that they were responsible if they did anything irresponsible with ChatGPT or any of the other bots, and reminded them, or I think overly impressed upon them, that hallucinations were real and that anything that they submitted to the courts would be held responsible for. The problem with this, and this is where I'm going to get to your answer. The problem with this is professionals like attorneys, they don't know there's deeper pieces to AI yet, right? So they're still caught out on that Anthropic and Claude, ChatGPT level. They're still stuck out there. Those are still very creative in orientation as opposed to task driven. And all right, so that's one sort of story to emphasize this. But two, if we start looking at the way a lot of the current agents are delivered, it's still very juvenile. And I don't
Mhm.
mean that it's juvenile in a bad way, I just mean it's very young. So what they're doing is they're deploying their agent. They've got an interface and they're saying, bring all of your data to our AI and our AI will take care of this task for you, right?
Mhm.
That's not what I would suggest, especially when we're talking about larger systemic opportunities like the court system for an entire state. In that, you need not only an environment, but you need an ecosystem. So, one of the other things that we're trying to do, once we can get things registered and then we can get them standardized and then we can get them to communicate with each other, then we've got a contract layer that works like governance so that the API layer that works with access actually tells the agents what they can and cannot do, and has a body of regulation within the resources to which they are assigned. Then we have an entire ecosystem. So, for example, using that evidence concept, we have the immutable core amount of evidence, but a prosecutor's office and a public defender's office could use entirely different agents. And the likelihood is they'll use multiple agents, whether it's structured data or object storage or whatever the case may be. You may even want to use multiple agents on a single piece of object storage, right? Or a single video file, for example. We start with one by producing a public facing video that can be released via a link. We go further and we transcribe everything that happened for evidence purposes within that video. Then we add another agent where we can go in and translate that into any language that we need. And we can do it in an active status, a passive status, Or if we need to, because videos are huge and storage is expensive, we can put them into archive status, but call them out of it whenever they're needed. So on top of that, you have not only the data sovereignty of the original file, you have to have data sovereignty over the prompts, the agents, the output, and then you can start looking at things like how to deliver it and how to cache it and how to do everything else. But you've got to wrangle all of those squirrels
Wow.
into a container and tell them what they may or may not do, actually control it, and actually monitor their performance in terms of a success or failure rate, not just force them into compliance and then ignore that what else is going on. And then you have amazing logs and the ability to audit huge amounts of things in a very timely fashion.
But that seems, and Chad, I'm going to shut up in just a second, but that seems to be a bit of an auditing nightmare.
Not really. Not if, well, put it this way, not if it works the way I plan it. We can all say that about a lot of projects. Um, it it's very granular. It's very specific. This is why I laugh when we talk about attorneys using AI and complaining about hallucinations because it's generally user error. They don't know the AI. They don't know what they're doing. The AI, the agents, many of the agents haven't been trained. They haven't experienced it before, and folks really want IT to just turn it off and back on again and have it work. It's more complicated than that. And truthfully, and I'll say this purely as a side note, there are going to be a lot of jobs erased by AI, but there are also going to be a lot of jobs made by AI, right? So when we have, for example, those case flows, we can sort by nature, or we can sort by round robin or whatever else, but there tends to be sort of an air traffic controller position that's created by making sure caseloads are done appropriately and things end in the appropriate destination. They have the right number of seats for the right number of agents using the right number of tokens, the blah 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 blah. And all of that coordination still very much needs to be supervised. It can be monitored. We can give the bureaucrat the infamous dashboard that they absolutely require. But from those of us that are actually in the guts of these things, we need to know how those things function. And when they do, it is a beautiful thing that to date has not been seen. So it's a bit of a creative thing as well.
I want to root back a little bit to try to help our audience understand a bit more about data sovereignty from kind of a not too general a perspective. I mean, I understand the role that AI plays. I understand that there's a lot of confusion that needs to be rectified through education, as well as a great sensitivity in terms of how information is being passed from one system to another from a very general perspective. So I understand the role that AI plays in that kind of, let's just call it challenge.
Mhm.
But if we think more broadly, I mean, we've got folks here working with Drupal who are touching a lot of different IT systems like email, file storage, databases, web servers. So you can talk about hosting. So FedRAMP, I think, comes into play. But even if we're talking like a municipality or a hospital, I'm just trying to think of all the possible clients that agency like Blue Fly, a collective or similar sort of groups would be trying to pay attention to helping.
Sure,
You
sure.
know, we talked about how data sovereignty is about having control over that data throughout the entirety of the life cycle for the sake of things like privacy, security, knowing that you are being held responsible as an organization for the handling of that information, the manipulation of that information, and then sometimes even the processing of it for the sake of guiding something. So if I'm talking about a hospital, what does that mean about an intake form? If I'm talking about a municipality, maybe it's a housing authority or something like that, how are we gathering information about people who need financial support for housing or things like that? So regardless of the type of client, I think we can all agree that if I'm talking digital transformation, I'm taking a look at the landscape of your technology stack, how it serves your organization and your audience, and then reevaluating things like data sovereignty when I'm trying to make improvements to that technology stack. So I know that you have a
Sure.
sensitivity to things like FedRAMP, but FedRAMP and these other
Right, right.
non-AI systems. What are your thoughts?
Well, let's start with one of the basics that we're all pretty much all already using now, which is a search indexing provider, right? So Drupal has its own search, but of course that requires all of the compute power, the PHP procs and everything else within Drupal. It's in the database within Drupal. It's in the file system within Drupal. It's everything's in Drupal in that particular instance. But as we know, in a municipality is a great example. We can use any of the search indexing providers that we can plug into a Drupal instance, and say we have 15 different departments across a municipality, which is actually a very low number.
Yeah.
You can actually put all of them from their original sites into their own index, but then you can apply those indexes to the searching on any or all of the sites. And that offloads all of that energy, all of that compute power, all of that time, including allowing for some caching and that type of thing, onto the search indexing servers, not onto your Drupal instance. So you can still have your Drupal instance, let's say, going to work in being indexed, recruiting people, giving a UI and a UX to the people that need it, that when they need to go deeper or when they're searching for something more granularly appropriate to them, it's actually coming from servers that are not in your hosting paradigm for that Drupal instance. And it's fantastically more efficient. It's as I would say it is as important for a site that requires searching than something like a CDN and a WAF. It's like that level of importance. So yeah, that's where we're all starting from together at this point.
I think we'd originally titled this episode, "Will Data Sovereignty Be the Death of FedRAMP?" which I think can be a little bit clickbaity, because it's like there are a lot of people very sensitive to that and they really want to know our thoughts. Can you directly attack that specific question?
Happily, FedRAMP is dead. FedRAMP is going
Can you be
nowhere.
more subtle than that?
Yes, I can. It's FedRAMP's it's just outdated. There's too many tools and too many ways that can be used at too high a level and represent the diversity of what's going on in all of the user partitions, whatever that may be for the scenario. And our ability is simply growing way past FedRAMP. One of the ironies of FedRAMP with Drupal is FedRAMP folks will come in very confidently and they'll have a bureaucrat deliver the answer of an attorney, and it will be that, well, all developers have to be located in the United States and be US citizens or authorized to work in the US in order to work on a FedRAMP project. Drupal wasn't created by an American. Half of the modules that we used are involved by other than Americans or non-Americans or however you want to put it. And any of us in Drupal are unbelievably thankful for that broad spectrum and
Mhm.
want to take advantage of those. Like, I don't know how much of Drupal would actually be left if you took out all the foreign contributors and contributions that they made. Like, it just, like, core wouldn't be there, right? So it FedRAMP's FedRAMP's not made for technology. FedRAMP's made for agreements and structuring. And as much as I'm sitting here talking about standardization and that kind of thing, which I am a fan of, but it's because it allows us to work at a higher level. The FedRAMP requirements across the board are just plain outdated.
So I guess it's kind of like HIPAA and using fax machines instead of email
Well,
when it
Yeah,
comes to
yeah.
transferring stuff.
that's the question that I'm kind of coming up with now, Chad, which is how many other things are going to become redundant due to AI? We're saying some of these vast standardization engines, right? What are your thoughts there, Johan?
Well, I wouldn't even pay attention to the vast engines. I would pay more attention to the individual agents because we can
Mm,
do agentic deployments of agents, right? So yeah, an agent can do one task, right? I'm not saying it can't do more than one task. I'm saying it can do as little as one task, but it can be deployed over and over and over and over again. When I use that body worn camera thing, it's a every time the body worn camera gets saved or that file gets saved, you can automatically deploy an agent. And then when that agent uh, completes its task, let's say, you can trigger a second agent to go in, right? And then a third agent. So you got your first agent on the video file blurs out the faces. Your second agent creates a transcript. Your third agent does a translation, right? We can key all of these to happen while we're asleep, while we're not in attendance.
hmm
And it satisfies the obligations that these, I'm kind of getting a little bit specific here, but it satisfies the obligation in the information age that under things like Freedom of Information Act, I know Canada's got an equivalent, that we can satisfy those demands automatically and with, we're talking fractions of pennies and milliseconds as opposed to this human nature. But I don't want anybody to think that all of a sudden AI is just wiping out jobs. It will do that, but it will create those other jobs as well, which I think are a higher level and a higher level of coordination and maintenance and judgment that will I think actually make the human work considerably more valuable.
What strikes me from what you were saying earlier is that the individual, and we've seen this a lot with regard software deployment, etc. There's not only that intelligence around the technology, but also the industry and how the industry works, right? That you're working within. And that creates a bit of a different kind of thinker.
Absolutely. And one of the things that Bluefly is doing specifically with this, and it's going to be released upcoming at DrupalCon in Chicago, is our CEO Thomas Scola has actually started working on a standardized compliant agent marketplace. And not only does it become a singular marketplace, but as everybody that's followed me for any time knows, I'm a big fan of quantum distributions and white labeling and that type of thing. He's got the ability to allow others to create their agentic marketplaces and then everybody draw from all of that pool of agents. And this is why I say you could easily say a law firm that gets involved in something that where evidence is important, which would be every law firm, could easily go in and have 15, 20 different people with their own set of technology tools, which would include, maybe a dozen agents apiece in order to work off that immutable resource at the core of that data sovereignty issue.
Hmm.
Kind of cool.
A little bit. But it also indicates very different ways of working.
Well, I wouldn't even push that too far. And the
Okay.
reason I say that is that people are going to work the way they're going to work,
Yep.
right? But this is sort of replacing everybody coming into the office, right? Like originally there was certain security protocols. If you would go to the office, you weren't allowed to attach thumb drives or carry back and forth hard drives or anything like that. There's certain security protocols. When we have data sovereignty over a tech stack, or when we can grant and enforce data sovereignty, you can have people that will typically use tunnels and VPNs and whatever else, so that all of that work product, everything that would be considered work product, even potentially, would be created, developed, maintained, and supported within that essentially an island in the clouds type of structure. And that is incredibly valuable, knowing that the way people work today is distributed. It just is. It's not going back. I don't care what billionaires tell everybody to go into the office. It doesn't matter. The value, the real value, the value that scales, is not done in-house. It can't be. It's mathematically impossible.
Yeah, I think we have a large expense of people trying to do a lot on their own, realizing that there are third-party solutions that already exist that tackle these things.
Yeah, I've
But
wasted
I,
years on those.
but I still, but I still think that it's important to have a level of sensitivity when it comes to the information that you're handling.
Yeah, yeah.
So I guess from one of our earlier questions, there's a geopolitical context here. So when we talk about data sovereignty, we're not exclusively talking about, Johns Hopkins Hospital handles its data and it's all in house and they have control over
Mhm.
it. So they have data sovereignty. It's not so much exclusively that. It's also a matter of, is this staying within the country where you have legal protections? Like you mentioned this earlier, sometimes things are shipped overseas and then it's licensed back. I'm in Canada. We talked on the last episode a little bit about digital solutions being specific to a country, and that not only helping jobs in a locality, but also trying to encourage digital solutions that live within those political boundaries. So I think there's an element of data sovereignty that I think would be important to explore here, that is within those political boundaries that we're talking about.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, I got a friend. I won't call him out, but he's pretty well known when it comes to AI and the legal and court system. He was one of the head prosecutors that handled the crimes against humanity in Rwanda. And now that was before we had AI, and he's spoken at length at Harvard, and he's written books, and he talks about the need for, at the time we would just call it databases, right? Like this is why I say it all starts with search, because you get this massive amount of information, and then you find your nerd with a laptop that turns it into a database like me, and then you need to search it when you need to extract information out of it. And he's been one of the people that has led the concept of, in their case, they needed the data not in their possession, they needed it at arm's length. But then in that scenario, not in that instance, because again, that predated a lot of the tools that we have now. But if we were to look at something like that again, we would say, okay, we want to be able to deploy agents where people cannot access the data, cannot access or influence the agents, cannot access or influence the outcomes or observations or work product of those agents. And we're all in the middle of this, which is a very parallel debacle right now with the Epstein files. In a modern system, one, nobody would get the Epstein files, although it appears that every one of our, let's say, non-allies has managed to get access to those files. But if we were to truly be honorable in a justice system, and they would say, okay, all of this is now public information, it would have been the click of one button, and all of that information would have been in a structured, metadata indexed and indexable and agentic flow process where it could all be assessed very quickly. And instead, we've got people running around doing amazing work, but having to do the work nonetheless in order to make any of that information usable. And as a person that's worked with the Department of Justice, I'm telling you, they don't have it any easier in the Department of Justice, especially because they're FedRAMP. You can see how disorganized they are because their systems are not up to snuff, but they've got standards that they're mandating that have nothing to do with increasing the functionality and accomplishing the end task of justice. So that's what's at stake. That's what we're working on. And it goes for everything, right? This is the information age. This isn't, I'm not talking about the Epstein files or the Rwanda genocide or anything specific like that. I'm saying all information can and should be stored in a responsible manner. And a big portion of that is metadata. I'm amazed at the number of people that miss the metadata link because that's what's allowing the agents to talk to each other and the computers to talk to each other and for people to get what they're seeking without having to go out and get a PhD or a JD or whatever else, where they can simply look at. Matter of fact, I did the exact thing 2 weeks ago for the LA Sheriff's Department because their manual on policies and procedures had no metadata. And the reason was they didn't want it indexed. They didn't want it to be able to be seen by an AI, but they have the obligation to do so. Now they're doing so. Now they're correcting the error of their ways, and they have much, much better tools with which to do it. Sorry, I think I went on a little bit of a rant there.
No. You never.
Yeah.
It's fascinating because I've always said he who owns the taxonomy wins.
Absolutely. Well, quantum dictionary.
Yeah.
Lexicon in general.
Quantumdictionary.io is a project of mine. It's a funny little nothing project. You'll see I still left it in Olivero. It's on a inexpensive hosting package on Pantheon. You can check it out. And it's a way to, instead of have one giant dictionary, it's a platform that creates an infinite number of dictionaries and then provides for each dictionary a definition of each or every word within the context of all the other words within that thematic dictionary. And that is a really simple way to look at how we can build knowledge bases that can be private. And this goes back to the ecosystem that you develop, that if you put the knowledge and you put the example outputs and you train the agents and you keep it all in a confined area so it can't be what I call polluted by just other influences, then a company almost 100% of the time will eliminate the hallucinations. Everything goes up in a higher level of accuracy. We've got language translation. If you are providing the resources of a dictionary, can increase beyond human accuracy in language translation. So you can have a native speaker of, let's just pick out Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And well, Chinese is a bad example.
Double byte. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. French. Let's just say French, right? It's still a Western language. But you can have a native speaking French person do some translations, and the AI translations will be better, not only in the translation, but in the contextuality, in the use case for the company, right? That has this dictionary, their answers from the agents will exceed 96% accuracy.
Wow.
So you couldn't get 4% hallucinations eliminated from a group of people. If you had support techs or whatever the case may be, you're going to have at least a 4% bias or variance rate in every scenario. So if you can exceed that, predictably exceed that, adjust it when you do need tuning, and then deliver at that high rate of accuracy, plus monitor, audit, log, everything else in order to identify corrections that need to be made and that type of thing. That's how AI becomes not just survivable, but successful for corporations. and sole providers, and a single attorney using the proper legal dictionary is no longer Black's, right? Sorry, for those that don't know, Black's Law Dictionary is the go-to dictionary, but it doesn't do anything contextual, and it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't influence the market, right? So when you have a book, a literal book, somebody writes a book, where does that go? And the answer is, when it comes to agentic deployments and AI and corporate, it doesn't go anywhere. You wrote it and you threw it out the window, right? Because you're not going to have everybody read it. You're not going to have that level of accuracy. You don't have a human nature that can handle that level, that propensity for accuracy. But the agents can, and they do well.
Well, this has been super educational.
Yeah.
uh,
And we're going to be discussing this at DrupalCon.
DrupalCon. We're going to introduce the AI marketplace at DrupalCon. We're going to introduce the contract plane, which controls all the agents within a distributed system for the purposes of data sovereignty. All these are this is what everybody's talking about out in the market right now, and for what it's worth, it's sort of been happening outside of Drupal, and I'm ecstatic to see that it's coming into Drupal. Very much so.
Yeah, I think our community is quite primed for it.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for kind of walking us through this. This is, I think, a lot more depth than I expected for something related to digital sovereignty. But still, I think that's why we have you on. It's about really just trying to get different perspectives here.
Well, I hope I didn't confuse too many people, and keep an eye open, because we're going to be bringing this stuff to market, and it's going to be. I just enjoy it. But thank you for having me, for sure.
Yeah,
Always
for
a
sure.
pleasure, Johan.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll certainly see you at DrupalCon and in upcoming episodes about well, if nothing else, the growth and direction of Bluefly. But to our audience, thanks for listening to the BlueDrop podcast. We've enjoyed having you with us.
And if you'd like to learn more about Bluefly and our team, check us out at DrupalCon if you're there. We will be walking around in t-shirts and caps. And please visit our website at bluefly.io. Thanks so much, everybody. And thank you, Johan.
Thanks.